Okay. So, okay. Okay. So, welcome everybody. It's nice to see you in our 70th meetup session, which is organized by Baku Power BI and Modern Excel User Meetup Group. So, what happened in Baku Power BI and Modern Excel User Meetup Group till now? We have held 16 sessions, just with the participation of experts from different parts of the world, like Kempas, Kasper Kamenshek, Bragati Jane, Claudia Bukli, and others. And also, what's happening now in Excel world? I would like to begin with the books that have published in recent weeks or months. First of all, I would like to begin with the book of Kempas. He has updated his book. Previously, his book was called M is for Data Monkey, and after updating, the new book is called Master Your Data, and I strongly recommend you to buy this book and to read. It's very useful. And then also, Reza Rad and Leila Itaiti have published their new book. It's also related to Power Query. So there are two books in a bundle, so you can also try to buy it. I also recommend to buy this book. It's very useful. And maybe one of the biggest virtual summit related in Excel world is going to be happen in Bangladesh. So it's going to be happen on October 16. If you have desire or time, opportunity, I offer you to join to this summit. And also, one good news is that Redakat Academy, and specifically Leila Itaiti, who is one of the owners of this academy, just gives to one attendee of our each session 1 month free subscription. So I don't select it randomly. I select it personally because I think it's the best way to select, depending based on some criteria. So I have my person in my mind, so I give this opportunity to one attendee at each session. So for this, I would like to thank to Leila Itaiti and Reza Rad. Also, as for our today's speaker, today's speaker is Chris Webb, who is Principal Program Manager at Microsoft. I would like to thank you, Chris, for accepting my invitation. And Chris is going to talk about using Excel as a reporting and analysis tool for Power BI. Before this session, I studied these materials and I found it very interesting and useful. I strongly believe that it's going to be interesting and very useful for also each of us. And as for our next speaker, he is from USA, and his name is Reza Durrani, who is going to talk about Power BI integration with Power Apps and Automate. So thank you for your attendance and enjoy the session. I believe that I'm going to see you on October 22nd, 2021. So stage is yours. Chris, let me stop sharing. Okay. So here you are.
All right, let me share my screen.
Okay.
Let me know when you can see.
Yes, I see your screen.
Cool. All right. So thank you for inviting me to speak. I have a couple of slides, but most of my session is going to be just demos. And what I want to talk about today is using Excel as a reporting and analysis tool for Power BI data. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit about Power BI. And I guess because this is an Excel user group, I assume you know quite a lot about Excel. But some of the things I show you in Excel maybe they will be new to you. Some of the features I will be showing you in Excel are very new. So they are features that have maybe only been released in the last few months. Some of the features are features in Excel that have been there for at least 15 years, but maybe you still haven't seen them before. All right, my name's Chris Webb. I work at Microsoft on the Power BI Customer Advisory team, which means that I specialize in Power BI, but I also love Excel as well. I blog about Power BI here, and you can follow me on Twitter as well if you want. So there is one thing that we will not be talking about in this session, which is export to Excel. No export to Excel at all. Now, you might be thinking, isn't that how I get my data from Power BI into Excel? The answer is no. There are more ways of working with data from Power BI in Excel, and we will be talking about them in a moment. Now,
Chris, I think you got muted accidentally. You're muted.
Unmute myself. Yeah, no, I'm unmuted now.
Perfect now.
Cool. All right. So before we start, we need to at least have a discussion. The first question you need to ask yourself before seeing all these demos is why? Why should I use Power BI with Excel? Why can't I just use Excel in the way that I already have done? Why can't I just use export to Excel the way that everybody wants? Well, first of all, if you're thinking about building a reporting solution in Excel, we all know that exporting is the part that breaks easily. If you've got a beautiful looking Excel report, but the process to get the data into Excel starts with an export, well, somebody needs to be able to do that export. They need to be there, available to click the button. And if that person goes on vacation, or if that person goes to another job, then the process breaks and people don't get their reports, and this is bad. Secondly, if you are exporting, then somebody else inside your organization is probably exporting as well. And they are probably exporting at a different time. And maybe they're getting a different version of the data. And after they've exported to Excel, maybe they are making different changes. Maybe they're cleaning the data up differently. Maybe they're defining calculations differently. So if you're exporting and other people are exporting, this is how you get to Excel hell. This is how you end up with multiple versions of the truth. This is how you end up with two people in the same meeting saying, my report says this, my report says this, and nobody agrees. And moving on, if you're working with large amounts of data, Excel can't handle the same type of data volumes that Power BI can. So you may be looking at really large data volumes, more data than you can fit on an Excel worksheet, maybe more data than you can fit in Power Pivot with the Excel data model. Power BI can scale up to much, much larger data volumes. And even if Excel can handle the data volumes you're working with, you will probably find that Power BI is faster for doing certain calculations, for aggregating data, for writing complex DAX calculations. Power BI is often much faster than Excel for these things. So I would say if you're building reports with Excel, then there is a good reason for you to keep your data in Power BI and connect Excel up to that, and just simply use Excel as the reporting layer on top of Power BI. Moving on, there's another question. Some of you may be Power BI users. And the question is, if I'm a Power BI user, well, I can already build reports in Power BI. Why should I use Excel? What's the point of giving my users their data in Excel when I can already build beautiful dashboards and reports in Power BI? Well, again, there are some good reasons to use Excel with Power BI. First of all, Power BI is all about self-service. It's about letting everybody in your organization build reports. Now, I think Power BI is quite easy to use, but it needs some training. And if there is one tool that everybody in an organization knows, it's Excel. And as a Power BI person, quite often people come to me and say, how can I do this particular chart or visual inside Power BI? They don't know how to do it in Power BI, but they do know how to do it in Excel. The same goes for calculations. A lot of people find DAX quite difficult to work with. And people often come to me and say, how can I do this calculation in DAX? It's really difficult, but I can do it in Excel. So if you give people Power BI data, but Excel as a tool for building reports on top of Power BI data, they get to use the tool that they know, Excel. They get to use all the visuals in Excel. They get to build some calculations in Excel. So I think there is a strong argument for using Excel with Power BI simply because everybody knows Excel. There are also certain things that Excel does better than Power BI. Now, PivotTables are the best example of this. Power BI reports are great for answering questions when you know what the question is. But sometimes people just want to explore the data. They want to see what's there. And a pivot table is great for that. An Excel pivot table, you start with nothing. You can drag and drop and slice and dice and see what's there in your data. Power BI does not have that same functionality. You have the matrix visual on a Power BI report, but it's nowhere near as interactive as a pivot table. And yes, we have the kind of visual personalization filter, but honestly, nothing is better than an Excel pivot table when you want to explore data. And to be honest, I have seen lots of Power BI reports that are obviously attempts at trying to recreate a pivot table. And if your users want pivot tables, give them Excel pivot tables. It's as easy as that. Another example of something that Excel does better is building certain types of reports, especially financial reports. Financial reports often have a very particular layout, which can be quite difficult to recreate in Power BI, but actually is very easy to build in Excel because that's the tool that people always use to build these reports. So as we'll see later, there are certain things that you can actually do better, certain layouts you can do better in Power BI. And the last thing to say is we all know that people want to just dump data in Excel. They still want to just get their data in Excel and play around with it themselves. And there is no reason why you can't still do data dump type Excel reports with Power BI. It's just that you can build them without having to do export to Excel. So I think these are good reasons why we should use Power BI with Excel and Excel with Power BI. So let's go on to the next part of the presentation and start to do some demos. So the first thing we need to talk about is how we can connect Excel to Power BI. Because the key thing that I'm going to show you here is how you can build reports in Excel on data that is inside Power BI without exporting the data, without copying the data at all. So the data stays in Power BI, but Excel can display that data. So we need to be able to create a connection from Excel up to Power BI. And there are two ways you can do this. You can do this by starting inside the Power BI portal, or you can do it from inside Excel. Right, let's go to the browser first. So first of all, this is the Power BI portal. And here I am on the Datasets Hub screen. So you can get to here by clicking on here. And here I can see all of the Power BI datasets that I've got access to. And this one looks like an interesting one. I can click on this. I can see information about this dataset. And I've got an option all the way up here to analyze in Excel. So I can click this Analyze button. And when I do this, I'll be able to download an Excel workbook and get an Excel workbook with a connection up to this dataset. There's another way that I can do this as well. How do I get rid of this? Zoom is getting in the way. I'm kind of used to working with Teams, and let's go to, there we go. So here's the workspace that dataset was in. Another way to create a connection is by going to the workspace, finding my dataset and connecting from there as well. So for example, here's my dataset. I can click on here, click Analyze in Excel. This time I will click it. I will click to download. See, it gives me a new Excel file that I can download. I can open this. And in a moment, you'll see that I've got a pivot table. I can enable editing, enable content. Wait a moment for it to connect up to Power BI. It takes a little bit of time. And here is my pivot table connected up to the dataset in Power BI. Now, as I said, the really important thing to understand is that even though I have a pivot table here in Excel, the data has stayed in Power BI. I am not exporting data. Every time I interact with this pivot table, a new query is generated against my Power BI dataset. And that means that everybody connecting from Excel to Power BI like this is using exactly the same data, and it can be refreshed on a schedule inside Power BI. And that means that everything is always up to date. So, I can click on my count of sales measure here, click to select it, add month name down here. I can add a slicer and slice and dice my data. Give it a moment. There we go. So I can slice and dice my data. And remember, every time I change a filter or a slicer, Excel goes away, connects back to the data inside Power BI, inside the Power BI service, and runs a query against it. So this is one way to make a connection from Excel to Power BI. It involves starting in the Power BI portal, finding a data set, and clicking Analyze in Excel somewhere. But there's another way. So let's close this Excel workbook. And here is an empty Excel workbook that has nothing in it. So another way of connecting is to start in Excel and connect up to Power BI from there. And I think this is a better way of working. This is more natural. If I want to work in Excel, well, I don't want to go to Power BI first. I want to go directly to Excel. And there are a number of different ways that I can create a connection to Power BI. I can go to Data and go to Get Data and then click from Power BI. So this will create a pivot table connected up to a Power BI dataset. Another thing that I can do is actually go to Insert, Pivot Table, and go from Power BI here. Now, when I do this, you'll see this Power BI datasets pane opens up on the right-hand side. This will give me a list of all of the datasets available to me. There are a lot of datasets available to me inside the Microsoft tenant, but I can click here on the price paid dataset. And it will build a pivot table, again, connected up to the data inside Power BI. And I can select count of sales, average price paid, drop month down there, and it works in exactly the same way as before. So this is how you connect Excel up to Power BI, either starting in the Power BI portal and clicking Analyze in Excel on a data set, or from inside Excel and via the Get Data button or via the new Pivot Table button. We've created a connection. The next thing we want to do is to see how we can display Power BI data in Excel. And actually, there are 4 different ways. A lot of people who even know about Analyze in Excel think that pivot tables are the only option. And this is not true. There are lots of other different ways as well. As well as pivot tables and pivot charts, we have Excel cube formulas, organizational data types, and indeed tables as well. So let's see all of these things. First of all, pivot tables. Like I said, pivot tables and pivot charts are great for data exploration, and they are much better than the Power BI matrix visual. Something that is interesting to show is that there are some features in pivot tables connected to Power BI that are not available in regular pivot tables. And these are really useful things. These features are actually features that have been around for quite a long time because they were built originally 15 years ago when pivot tables, 15, 20 years ago, when pivot tables first learned to connect to analysis services. But because Power BI inherits a lot of technology from analysis services, these features all just work with Power BI as well. So let's see some of them. Let's go back to Excel. And here is the pivot table that I connected up to Power BI. Now, like I said, I can drag and drop, interact with my pivot table in the normal way. I can add filters on here that I can use to slice and dice. And I can also add slicers. So I can just right click and add a slicer. And here we go. So far, nothing really very interesting. Let's see some of these features that are only available for Power BI pivot tables. The first one to point out is the fact that we can now add our own calculations. How do I get rid of this blasted? Right, that's how I do that. So that's good. So if I click inside a pivot table, I've got under Pivot Table Analyze this OLAP Tools button and this Fields, Items, and Sets button. This is where a lot of the specific functionality that's only available for pivot tables connecting to Power BI or analysis services is. Now, one thing that I can do is I can add calculated measures or calculated members. This allows me to add my own calculations in. So for example, if I click on here to add a new measure, I could say, let's create a measure, I'll call it forecast, and maybe I will say it's going to be count of sales times 1.1. This is a really cool feature. The bad news is that this is not DAX, the calculation language of Power BI. This is an older calculation called MDX, which also works with Power BI, but it's quite easy to understand, to do basic calculations. But I've added my new calculation. I can click OK. And after this, a new measure will be created in my pivot table. I can add forecast on here, and you can see it's count of sales times 1.1. Something really interesting and something I can't actually do in Power BI is I can create what's called a calculated member. A calculated member allows you to create a calculation on a hierarchy that isn't measured. So if I go to here, I could say, let's put something on the month name hierarchy. And let's say it's going to be Jan plus Feb. And I could say here, let's aggregate. And I go to month name, January and February. If I click OK, and again, give it a moment. There you are. You see I have January plus February. And for the counter sales, yep, counter sales, January plus February is that. But this is the correct average. You'll see that it hasn't summed up the two averages here. It's actually pushed that calculation back to Power BI. And I'm getting the average I would expect, which is the average of all the average price paid for January plus February. So it's doing the right thing here, which I think is really cool. And I've got a dialog here to manage these calculations. These calculations appear in my pivot table up here as well, and I can select them and deselect them in the normal way. Something else that is really useful is this fields, items, and sets functionality. So fields, items, and sets allows you to create custom selections. And let me show you why this is useful. Now, pivot tables have always allowed you to select or deselect individual values. The fields, items, and sets functionality not only gives you more flexibility over this, but it also allows you to do something that you've never been able to do before, which is to select custom combinations from different fields. What do I mean by this? Let's click in my pivot table. And let's take property type name and put it up here on columns. Now, what you can see here is that I've got all of the combinations of my two measures, count of sales and average price paid, and all of my property types. This is how pivot tables work. You get a kind of Cartesian product. But what I can do now is go to fields, items, and sets, create a set based on column items. And I can say, let's call this my columns. And now I can actually delete combinations. I can say, let's have terraced for count of sales and average price paid. Let's have detached for average price paid. Let's have flat for count of sales. Let's have semi-detached for forecast. Any combination of any set of values from any of these fields. Click OK. Takes a little bit of time again. It always takes longer when you're doing a demo, but there you are. And you can see now I've got just about every single combination that I want of these two fields, which is a really powerful thing. Really useful as well when you're building specific financial layouts for financial reports. This set now appears in the pivot table, and I can select it and deselect it like anything else. Another interesting thing is show details. So what I can do is if I filter my pivot table and I can say, there were 71 sales in January, what were they? I can double click on my pivot table. And by default, it will give me all of the rows in a table that is still connected up to Power BI for that cell that I just clicked on. And if we go down here, you can see that there are indeed that many sales. So it started at line 3. That means there are 71 sales. And the cool thing is now, within the last couple of weeks, you've actually got the possibility in Power BI of customizing this. So you can build any table you want when you do that double click. One more cool thing to show. We've got a slicer here. And this slicer controls this pivot table. With pivot tables and pivot charts and slices connected up to Power BI, though, you can actually have a slicer that controls more than one pivot table or pivot chart. So for example, if I go to insert here and insert pivot chart, actually, let's not do it that way. Let's go and insert pivot chart here. And let's use an external data source. I'm going to choose the existing connection that I've got up here, called price paid. Click OK. And again, it takes a little bit of time. Here's my pivot table. Let's bring in average price paid and look at it by day of the week. Now, at the moment, I've got a pivot table and a pivot chart, but my slicer here only controls this pivot table. So I change something, the pivot chart doesn't change at all. But what I can do now is if I click on my slicer, I can go to report connections, and it knows that that chart 2 is using the same connection. I can check this box here, and now my slicer controls the pivot table and it controls the pivot chart. So this is really important when it comes to building reports in Excel that have got more than one visual in. You want to have a single slicer that controls more than one visual. So that's a quick summary of all of the cool stuff you can do there with pivot tables and pivot charts. There are more features coming here as well. For example, at the moment, one of the issues with pivot tables is if you connect it up to Power BI, you can only use the measures that are already defined in the data set. Coming soon, you'll be able to just take any field, drag it into a pivot table, control how it aggregates in the way that you would with a normal pivot table, for example. Now, pivot tables are not the only way that you can interact with data. Now, as I said, there are other ways. And cube formulas are perhaps, I think, my favorite way of interacting with data in Power BI. They've been around for a long time, 15 years. But again, even people who know about analyzing Excel don't know about cube formulas. So what are cube formulas? Cube formulas are pretty easy to explain. They link an individual cell in Power BI, in Excel, to an individual value in Power BI. Now, the thing about pivot tables is that they grow and shrink. They're great for data exploration, but they're actually quite hard to format. And quite often you want to build a report in Excel that uses all of Excel's formatting functionality. And pivot tables, you can format pivot tables, but they always end up looking like pivot tables. They don't always play as well with other Excel functionality. Cube formulas are a way around that. By linking an individual cell in your worksheet to an individual value in Power BI, you get all of the great features in Excel natively, but all your data stays in Power BI. Now, how do we use cube formulas? Well, there are a couple of different ways. Let's just delete this pivot chart. And let's change this pivot table here. So I'm just going to put month name up here. Let's put average price paid in the pivot table and put property type name down here. The easiest way to get going with cube formulas is to actually take a pivot table, click inside it, go to Pivot Table Analyze, OLAP Tools, and then choose Convert to Formulas. And this will generate cube formulas for you automatically. So if I do this and convert to formulas, I get a little warning dialog. Click Convert. And when it's finished, my pivot table will be gone. There will be no more pivot table. Instead, what I will have are cells containing Excel formulas. Look, you can see they're up in the Excel formula bar. The really important thing to understand, though, is that these formulas, cube value, cube member, and there are various other formulas as well available. These are all formulas that link individual values in my worksheet up to values in Power BI and get them on demand. But of course, because these are just values inside cells, I can format the cells the way that I want. I can just clear these cells, and I can change a slicer, or I can change the pivot table filter, which is still here. And when it wakes up in a moment, it's always slow when I'm doing a demo. I think Teams and Zoom always use up a lot of CPU. What you'll find is, come on. In a moment, please keep on working. When it does finish, you'll find that the data updates. We'll just let it go for a little bit longer. There we go. All right, it's working again. So I can slice and dice still, but the data is up to date. The cool thing about this is that I can do my formulas in the normal way. So, I could say B4 times 1.1 again, and just drag that down. It all works in the normal way. I could even take this, cut it, paste it down here, and it all still slices and dices. I can have any layout that I want. That's how flexible these cube formulas are. And like I said, this is really important when it comes to building financial style reports, when you want complete control over the layout and complete control over the formatting. There are a ton of other cool things that you can do with this as well. So for example, let me first explain a little bit about what's going on here. If we look at the formulas here, there are two types of Excel function being used. On what was the rows and columns of my pivot table, for example, here, I have a cube member function. This is a function that either gets a measure or something that can be dragged onto rows or columns of the pivot table. So there's the measure, that's the cube member function that gets count of sales. Here is the cube member function that gets the property type name detached. In what was the body of the pivot table, I've got a cube value function here. If I click inside this, you'll see what it's doing is it's saying, get the value for whatever's on the price paid connection for the intersection of B1, which is the month name all, A4, which is the property type name detached, B3, which is the measure count of sales, and the slicer counting. So this is a formula that says get the value, which is the intersection of all of these different things. And because I can do all of these cool things with Excel cube formulas, I can start to do some other fun stuff as well. So at the moment, I'm not slicing by the day of the week, but I have that in my Power BI dataset. So what I can do is I can write a cube member function here, and I can start to write my own cube member function. This is just another Excel formula, so this is really easy to do. I need to wait a little bit for the IntelliSense to wake up, but I can say, let's get the date, day of week, and let's take Monday, put that onto there. Now, this is a cell containing the cube member function for Monday. So at the moment, it's not hooked up to anything. But I could go into here and say, well, at the moment, this is giving me, this cell gives me the count of sales for detached for all month names for whatever I selected in the slicer county. What I could do is hook this up to this value in cell E2 here. And let's get the value here for $E2. And now this shows me the count of sales for detached for whatever I've selected for the month, whatever I've selected for the county, but for the day of week Monday. And because this is an Excel formula, I can just drag it this way. I can drag it this way. And now all of my cells are getting data filtered by the value Monday. And because this is an Excel formula, I could type Tuesday in cell E1. And I could go into here and say, well, let's make this dynamic. And let's say $E $1. Enter there. And now all of my data is getting data filtered for Tuesday. I could type Wednesday here and I just type a value and it's all suddenly data driven. So there's loads of cool stuff you can do here with Q functions. And something even more cool than this. Q functions, the problem with Q functions is that they were just static. They're bound to cells. And if there was another type of property type that appeared in my data, I would actually have to physically go into Excel and add a new formula here to make sure it appeared. They weren't dynamic like pivot tables until now. Because if I go to my cheat sheet, which is here, let's open this. I've got some functions already pre-prepared. Let me copy this. Let's put this into B2. This is a CubeSet function. This is a fairly old function, but this is a function that gets a list of things, property types in this case, and it's bound to a cell. Now, at the moment, the cell just says property types, but it actually contains a list of values that I can get out. And I can get this out in a static way using the cuberank function, cuberank member function. But now with dynamic arrays in Excel, I can now go into here, use a function, a formula like this, put this into here, and now I can use the new cool dynamic array functions that have been released in Excel to get a dynamic list of property types, which means that if a new property type gets added, it will automatically appear in the cell that spills over from B4. So this, I think, is really, really cool. And it allows you to do other kind of useful stuff. And I can build something that's a bit like a pivot table from this. So if I go to here and let's say we put something like that here and do another fun. Here, there we are. Now I've got a dynamic array that gets all of the values for count of sales for these property types. So I've got something that makes a cube functions behave a little bit more like a pivot table, a little bit more flexibly. I get really excited by geeky things like this. So cube functions, I think, are really, really cool and useful, especially when you want to get complete control over layout. But there's even more. You're probably thinking that cube functions look a bit complicated. And yeah, it's true, they are. They're very powerful, but they are a little bit complicated to work with. There is also something that does something very similar to cube functions, but something which is perhaps a lot simpler. Organizational data types. Now, this is another new feature in Excel. And organizational data types are not just limited to Power BI. There are lots and lots of different data types that have appeared in the data tab in Excel. They also allow you to link data in your worksheets to external data, including Power BI data. But let me show you what they do. Let's create a new worksheet. Let's zoom a little bit. Now, as I said, you may have seen on the data tab, there are lots and lots of data types that you can put in here. We've got foods, terrain, yoga, universities, people, all kinds of different things. So I could type Bill Gates in here. I could say that he is a person. And what it's done is it's got data from some curated data that Microsoft uses. It's recognized Bill Gates as a person, And now I could say B2 and say, what's his full name? William Henry Gates III. I could say B2, what's its height? It's 1.78 meters. Loads and loads of interesting information about Bill Gates, but well, okay, I'm not going to build a report all about Bill Gates. I want to get information from my company. And what I can do is I can actually publish my Power BI data in a way that it can be consumed as organizational data types. What I've done is I've got a PBIX file here. And in order to get this to work, you have to go to your Power BI dataset and choose a table. And then you have to turn on this is featured table option. Once you do that on a table and you've published a Power BI, this allows the data in this table plus any measures to be consumed as an organizational data type. There's a little bit of setup to do, but it's fairly straightforward. You have to say, come on, where's the dialogue gone? Ah, there we go. There's a little bit of setup about what the row label is, what the key column is, but it's fairly straightforward. But what it means is that you can go here and say, well, I've got some property types. And I can take this data. I can now go up to here and say, well, these are property types. Click on this. Now, in some cases, it will just recognize it. In other cases, it's a little bit confused. It needs me to dedupe. Does that mean detached or semi-detached? Well, it means detached. I'm going to click select and it will have recognized it. And now I can do the same thing I did with Bill Gates. I can say B2 and let's find a description of this. I could do that. I can get measure data. Now, when I first did this demo, I did what I just did before, and somebody from the Excel team said, "Well, you're not doing the cool new thing. You're not using dynamic arrays again." So I can say, actually, to do this in an even more impressive way, let's go to B2 to B4, select an array, and now let's get the description. And now I get that as a dynamic array. But I could also get not just the description, I could get some measure values, the count of sales, all kinds of cool stuff. I can even, if I want, get an image out if I declare that properly inside Power BI. So this is an image that's actually been stored inside my Power BI dataset, and I can make that appear inside Excel. Organizational data types are pretty new. They are easy to use, but they aren't quite as flexible for building reports as cube formulas. But I think for beginner users, they will find these really, really useful and really easy to use. And what's more, they also have some other cool features like the one we've just seen here. I would say they're quite useful for building kind of catalog type reports. If you want to maybe choose a product barcode, enter it in the cell, declare it as a property type, and then get information about that particular product. So that's organizational data types. But there's even more. We can have regular old Excel tables connected up to Power BI and run our own queries from this. And like I said, this is what you want to do if you absolutely have to give your users a data dump type report. Those people who say, no, I've absolutely got to be able to export to Excel. I don't care about pivot tables. I don't care about cube formulas. I don't care about organizational data types. Just give me a table of data in Excel and I'll do my own thing with it. So you can do that and you can still hook the table up to the data in Power BI. There are a couple of different ways you can do this. If we go back to our Excel workbook up here, you'll remember that by double-clicking on a pivot table, I was able to create a table of data with information from Power BI. Actually, I can take this table and I can write my own DAX query and associate it with this table. So if I go over to here, I've got a DAX query that I've already pre-written. I can go to here. I can go to table edit query. And this is the query that at the moment gets what we see in here. I can just delete all of this, paste the DAX query that I've written already, click OK. And there's the results of that DAX query. It's no longer relevant. So I can take a DAX query and just bind it to an Excel table. And then if I want to rerun it, I can just refresh it in the normal way. So I think that's pretty cool. It's a little bit fiddly to set up and not quite so flexible. What I can also do is I can use Power Query. So I've got another Excel workbook up here. And I've got exactly the same query that I showed you before, but created using Power Query. So with Power Query, what I can do is I can go to data, get data, in the way that I would normally with Power Query, but go to from database, from analysis services. And if I'm using Power BI Premium or Premium per user, there is a way that you can make a data set in Power BI Premium or Premium per user appear as though it's analysis services or Azure analysis services. This is a feature called XMLA endpoints. And all I need to do is use this from analysis services option, give Power BI the XMLA endpoint address. Which if I go back up to the browser up here, I can get this by going to settings, premium, and just copying this here. And now if I edit query and open up the Power Query editor, you'll see all I've done here is connected up to that data set and just got my DAX query pasted in here. So nice and easy. One of the advantages of doing this is that I can rename the columns and get rid of those horrible square brackets and things and make it look a lot better. Something else I can do here, though, is I can make this parameterized. So what I've got also in here is pretty much the same DAX query, but I've parameterized it. And I've also got a named range here where I can type a month name. And what I've done is I've changed my Power Query. So it not only runs my query against Power BI, but it also reads the month name that I type in here from this named range. And it uses that to filter the data even more. And what's more, I've also created a bit of VBA to refresh my table up here. So what I can do here is I can type a month name here, click refresh. And what this is doing is it's taking the month name that I've typed in here, injecting it into the DAX query that I've written, running that against my Power BI dataset, getting the results, and displaying it in this table here. Takes a little bit of time. Once it's warmed up, it'll work, but you'll see that the numbers change. There we go. Do the same thing, click refresh, run the query, get the result back, but get the result back into an Excel table. So I think this is another really great option for people who want to be able to connect to data in Power BI. And there's more cool stuff. This, I think, is perhaps the most exciting thing that has happened with either Excel or Power BI in the last couple of months. All of the demos I've shown you just now are in Excel on the desktop. And Excel on the desktop is great until you want to share your reports with other people. And up until recently, Excel reports connecting to Power BI using PivotTables or cube formulas or organizational data types only worked in Excel on the desktop. They did not work in Excel Online, but now they do. And this means that you can build your report in Excel, save it to OneDrive for Business or SharePoint, and other people can view and interact with your report either in the browser by connecting to Excel Online directly, or by viewing those Excel reports inside a Power BI workspace. So let's see this. So if I go to my browser up here, I have published a report up to, saved it to OneDrive for Business. And now what I can do is I can open up my nicely formatted report here in OneDrive for Business. It's opening it in the browser. It works in Chrome, it works in Edge. This is a report that uses cube formulas. It uses pivot tables and pivot charts. It's got a slicer on it, but it works in the browser. So I can click and interact. And in a moment, when it's warmed up again, you'll see that the numbers all change. So I've got an interactive Excel report in the browser in OneDrive for Business. Well, let's maybe not do that. That's obviously not looking too good. Hopefully that will carry on working. There we go. And what's more as well, I can publish this up to Power BI. There's my same Excel workbook published into a Power BI workspace, and I can consume it from inside my Power BI workspace, inside a Power BI app if I want to publish it there as well. There we go. Should have chosen that. That's the one that gives me errors. So I think this is a really, really amazing option for anybody that wants to publish Excel reports to their users. And I think a really useful option for anybody in Power BI who wants to give their users a pivot table just to explore the data, but just wants to give it to them in a browser. The last thing to talk about are permissions and licensing. And how do you get all this to work? The good news is that if you've got Power BI and you've got Microsoft 365 and you're working in a business, you've probably got everything you need. From an Excel point of view, most things will need at least Excel 2010, SP1 or later. And to be honest, if you're still using Excel 2010, it's probably time to upgrade. Some of the later things like organizational data types, they need the latest Microsoft 365 builds, and you'll probably also need a commercial or an educational subscription. It's not going to work if you've got an Excel home subscription, for example. On the Power BI side, you need build permissions on the underlying data set. The cool thing is we've also just loosened up the licensing requirements as well. So if you've published a Power BI dataset to a premium or a premium per user workspace, or your dataset is in my workspace, you only need a Power BI free license to be able to create Excel reports on top of it, which is really, really nice. Otherwise, you still need a Power BI Pro license as well. So that takes me up to time. That's an hour. Hopefully, I've shown you some cool new things with Excel and Power BI together. I can see there's a lot of stuff going on in the chat. So I'm ready to take questions if anybody's got questions.
Okay. I hope you hear me. Chris, thank you for your wonderful session. Really, it was very wonderful. And I took notes, I mean questions and comments, and I'm just going to ask this question. And please, anybody, if I miss your question, be so kind as to unmute yourself and ask the question. So I would like to begin with the following question. So the first question was from Stephen McMurray. He was asking that, is that on free desktop version? Actually, I don't know. It's a full question or not.
So are you asking, can I connect Excel up to Power BI desktop?
Actually, it's...
Yes, but I asked before the bit at the end, but yes, effectively what you did was that the desktop version
of Power BI. No, I was connecting, all of my demos have been connecting up to a data set in the Power BI service. So
Okay,
you need
yes,
to
you
work
did
with a
answer that
published
in the
data
last
set.
slide, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it is technically possible to connect Excel up to Power BI Desktop if you want. There's an external tool that you can install in Power BI that will actually make it really easy to connect Power BI up to Excel up to Power BI Desktop. But to be honest, that's kind of only really useful for testing purposes. The real value comes when you've published your data up to the Power BI service, and everybody in Excel can connect to that same data set stored in the Power BI service.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Okay, let me go on with the next question. Christian Angel asks, can we add new measures to the model from Excel?
No, you can't edit or change the model from Excel. You can create temporary measures in the way that I showed you, but they live only in the Excel workbook that you're creating. You can't build a measure in Excel and publish it up to Power BI, unfortunately.
Okay, and Anthony Catella comments that the Excel file connects to the PBI dataset in the service.
Yes.
As far as I know, you need a Power BI Pro license to access the dataset from Excel. This is correct? Yeah.
Yes, I kind of covered that at the end. Unless you've got that, that's true, except if you're connecting up to a data set in My Workspace, your own My Workspace, you can do that with a Power BI free license. Or if your data set is in a premium per user workspace or a premium workspace, then you can use a Power BI free subscription, which, as I said, is free. All you need is build permissions on the underlying data set in order to be able to build a pivot table or connect from Excel.
Okay, so the next question is from John Keegan, and he asks that I would like to retrieve data from Power BI into Excel as a table of records rather than as a pivot table. Is that possible?
Yes, I showed that at the end. You can either do it by hacking the kind of drill to details table, or probably better using Power Query. Although, like I said, Power Query, that approach only works with Power BI Premium.
Yes.
This is something we're looking at making easier in the future.
Okay. And next question from Lydia. She asks that, is calculated member the same as create groups in Power BI?
It's not the same thing as calculation groups. It's kind of an older feature that was present in an older version of Analysis Services, multidimensional. It's not something that's available actually in Power BI anyway. It's something I would love to see in Power BI, and I think it's a really useful thing to have, but it's not quite the same thing as calculation groups. Actually, in a way, it's more powerful than calculation groups because it allows you to add new items to existing hierarchies, like I did with month name there. But it does allow you to do the same type of thing, yes, as calculation groups.
Okay, sixth question from Christian, and he asks that, can the calculated members be saved and reused by saving the Excel file?
It can be saved, it gets saved with the Excel file, yes. There's no easy way of reusing them, but there is an Excel add-in that's still available. It's a tool called OLAP Pivot Table Extensions. If I've still got a pivot table open up here, no, I don't. I need to, but there's an Excel add-in called OLAP Pivot Table Extensions, and I'm pretty sure I remember that gives you some functionality for doing that. So if you look for, there we are, OLAP Pivot Table Extensions, that has got, I'm pretty sure that gives you the ability to share calculated members as well. There you are, calculation library. So that's a nice free community developed Excel add-in.
Okay, and also the seventh question from Anthony Catella. I'm not sure whether I pronounced right or not, sorry for that. So it said that what's the feature in Power BI to control the tables that Chris mentioned?
Sorry, could you say that again? The controller table.
Chris, basically, there was something that you said when you were talking about the tables in Excel, and you said, "Oh, there's Power BI has brought out a feature in the last couple of months about changing the layouts of tables," and I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that.
There's a feature called visual personalization that allows you to customize the layout of any kind of visual.
Okay,
that's been out for about a year or so.
Okay, so that's what you're referring to. Okay,
yeah,
no,
it's an attempt to make Power BI a little bit more like a pivot table. But in my opinion, if your users want a pivot table, just give them a pivot table.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next one, actually, it's not related to directly related to the topic, but however, Lydia asks us that, what's the good source to learn more about Piv formulas? Performance
tuning. That's a big question. There are lots of different types of performance tuning. If you want to learn more about performance tuning for reports, one good place to start is probably Marco and Alberto's videos at SQLBI.com. They have a really nice 1 hour kind of introduction to performance tuning, and that should be, I guess, on here somewhere. Yeah, somewhere on here. They've got a lot of videos. But it's a session called so my report is slow, what now? Let's say there we go. Yeah, my Power BI report is slow, what should I do? So I would say that's a really good place to start. It only concentrates on DAX, and there are other things in Power BI that can make your report slow, like using custom visuals or really large image files and other stuff like that. But I think this covers the most important topics, which are all going to be around DAX.
Okay, and next, Tanja Cohen comments that she has only 2 data types in 365 version, and this version has been updated last month. So what's the reason?
So I believe some data types are only available in English, and I think I saw that on the chat that she said when she moved to English there are lots more.
Yes, Claudia Roja has mentioned it. Okay, that's the reason. Yes. And also, we have the last question, but not least, from Christian Engel. He's asking that, is my understanding correct that if you publish reports in my workspace, you can analyze in Excel a data set with free license so everyone can benefit?
Yes.
That was the last question, yes.
Exactly. So there's a blog post that was published at the end of August, talking about some of these licensing changes. So look for a blog post on the Power BI blog on August the 31st.
Okay, I think this is the end of our session. So once again, I would like to thank you, Chris, for a wonderful session. Really appreciate it. And if you don't mind, stay with us for next 3 or 4 minutes. And I kindly ask everybody to turn on their cameras. I will take a picture and then I will reward one person who is going to use Redacad Academy for next month, for a month.
Helga, can I ask a couple more questions to Chris?
I also have one more, if it's possible.
Yeah.
Sure.
Chris, can I ask a couple more to you?
Yep, go on.
Yeah, a couple more. If I've got a Power BI report published into our organization's tenancy, and I've shared that report with an external guest user, are they able to use Analyze in Excel to a data set if I share that data set with them?
No, that's a known limitation at the moment. I think that's something we may be working to try and fix. But there is, certainly last time I checked, and I think this is still true, a B2B user will not be able to use Analyze in Excel.
Oh, that's a shame, I must say. Oh, well. The other thing as well is, does row-level security work?
Yes, absolutely. Works in exactly the same way.
Okay, cool. And then the other one was, when you're talking about, if I've got a data set published into my tenancy, I then create an Excel report. So I'm assuming it's using my credentials to connect to that data set in the service. I then publish the Excel report into the service and the right thing. If another user is now using that Excel report, how do they refresh? Does the data set get refreshed under my credentials, or does it get refreshed under their credentials? And do they need build permission to the data set?
So they don't need build permission to just view, but they will be using their credentials to connect. Now, the word refresh is a loaded term. We're not talking about refreshing the data set. If you're talking about kind of running the report to get the data from the data set, then yes, they will be running as them and connecting to the report as them. But it works exactly the same way that Power BI reports do. You could build a Power BI report in Power BI Desktop, publish it up to the service. Somebody else could view the report, and they would still be running it as them. So there's no difference there.
Okay, yeah. So they would still have to have permission on that data set if they were using that Excel file that you've created.
Exactly.
For them. Okay, yes. That was a really important point that I wanted to just work out how to do. So,
yeah, it doesn't bypass security in any way.
Okay, and then one more other one is on the fields that you include in the data set. So all fields that you've published to the data set will be visible in that Excel pivot table.
Yes, unless you've specifically hidden them.
Yeah. So make sure you hide any ones that you don't want them to see. Then, so when is this implicit measure sort of going to be coming out?
Soon. I'm not quite sure when. To be honest, I didn't actually test it before this, but I'm obviously, because I work for Microsoft, I have a slightly more advanced build than everybody else. So it could even be kind of it could even be ready now for me. Let's have a try and see if it works. Come on. Yeah, I mean, I believe it's coming fairly soon.
Okay, yeah, cool.
So if I was to choose something like date and put it, no, it still doesn't work, I'm afraid.
Okay, cool. Christian, yours.
Yeah, only one question from me, Chris. In Excel, if you're building a Power Pivot data model and you load the table, you can right-click and go to edit DAX and use DAX as a query language. You showed something more or less similar connecting to a premium data set.
Well,
using Power
BI.
Query.
Yes,
Yeah,
but I also showed the same technique with the kind of drill to detail table as well. So not using Power Query, what I got here is I showed the same technique that you were talking about.
Yeah, can you modify here the query?
Yeah,
this is my question.
Absolutely. Yes,
so
it's exactly the same.
You can build a query in DAX Studio and use it, right?
That's exactly what I did. That's exactly what I did.
Thank you. Thank you.
Using this it's a little bit flaky. It's not as reliable as an XMLA endpoint, but it still works.
XMLA endpoint, it's limited to
premium. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but this one can be used without premium, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that was the last question. So once again, I would like to thank everybody for joining this session, and I also would like to announce the winner of today's session. Actually, not winner, just the person's name who is going to take this opportunity to use PivotTables Academy services for next month. This is Stephen McMurray, And I would like to thank him for his attendance, for his joining to my sessions. I really appreciate it. So once again, thank you for your attendance, for your contribution. I really appreciate it. I think it's time to say goodbye. So see you on October 22nd. So,
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.